Welcome everybody, welcome back to the channel. I promised an in-depth review of Ambon, Burning Sun and Little Seagulls from Snafu. I've managed to have a game, set the game up. I've played it solo. I haven't had a chance to play it with the guys at the club as yet. And I just wanted to share my thoughts on the game, how it plays, how it looks, how it feels. Some of them are sort of positive observations, any things that I feel were detrimental or impacted on the experience of playing the game. But let's just start with a little recap on the game itself. It's a folio game from Snafu. I've done an unboxing video or unbagging video which you'd be able to have a look at on the channel. It's a small counter density, 75 counters on a very small map, 42 by 30 centimeters, so just over a foot square. And I suppose my game lasted probably about an hour and 40 minutes, and that was with a lot of starting and stopping initially until I got a flavour for it. And I'd say probably the first few turns are where things are a bit slower, where you're dealing with the landings. But once the landings are out of the way, the game really rattles along very, very quickly. I only got to turn 8 because I could see that as the allied player, it would have made sense at that point to surrender. Yep, that's right, to surrender. I'll come on to that in a moment, rather than carry on till turn 10 and work out victory points from there. So in summary, this game is representing the Japanese invasion of Ambon, which was an island peninsula, and this was in 1942, and we were representing the Japanese invading force, which comes in by sea, which comprises of 3 or 4 sort of big units, including the Kure Special Naval Landing Division, and then you've got divisions from the Japanese Army as well. And if we take, and as the defenders, you're representing the Dutch Moluccan Brigade and the Australian Gulf Force as well. So it's an unusual setting, maybe not some of your sort of mainstream forces you would expect. You've got artillery, anti-aircraft type weaponry in there. You've got terrain challenges, and you've got things like mines in the sea lanes. So there's lots of different dynamics going on. My general feeling was immediately that this game offers an awful lot of different challenges to both sides. You can change your plan. I can see there being a lot of replayability with the game, because for a very small game you've got quite a few ways that you can invade as the Japanese player, and of course as a defender you're really just trying to play for time. So it's about how you allocate your forces and your dummy units to best effect to do that. So let's look at things from the perspective of both sides, and then I'll start to sort of just talk a little bit more about my general feelings in terms of the good and the bad of the game, if applicable. So starting with the Japanese. As a Japanese player, you're pretty unlikely to lose this game in terms of the invasion is going to succeed, and you should be able to always overpower the defenders because of the size of your and quality of your forces. But you've got to keep an eye on time, and you've got to hit the right points with enough force to be able to complete your mission. So as the Japanese player, you're trying to grab victory point locations on the map, which are very obvious. They're generally going to be quite well defended, and you've got a number of invasion routes that you can take. So you need to think about, are you going to concentrate forces? Are you going to hit different points? Are you going to put them all in wave 1 or in wave 2? And sort of what are your key areas that you're going to go for? You also need to factor in the kind of terrain, because there's a lot of difficult terrain like rivers and mountains on these islands, and they really are going to slow your forces down and give you handicaps when attacking units defending in those areas as well. So there's a lot there for the Japanese player to think about. In terms of wave 1, wave 2, and the whole landing mechanic is dealt with really cleverly. And as the Japanese player, you're kind of just rolling a single dice to see whether your troops get stalled, whether they land but they take casualties, or maybe their initial impact as they land is not as good, i.e. they get reductions in combat factors. And also, as the Japanese player, you're also having to contend with the fact that you're not going to be able to attempt to rally any of your units for the first couple of turns, and that's quite crucial as the defending player, and I'll come on to that in a moment. So lots to think about. As a Japanese player, you want to get as much of your force intact on the landing areas and get those beachheads established as soon as possible without being hit by mines in the minefields, and without taking too much early damage, maybe from counterattacks or things like that. So there's a lot to think about. As the game goes on and you can start to rally your units, because they're that bit stronger, will rally easier, and that's an advantage as the Japanese player. And likewise, as you get further into the game, you don't have to start thinking about supply. And if you start isolating any of your units as you go off looking for key objective points, if they can't trace supply lines back to your beachheads, then they become disorganized and they can't rally. So again, quite crucial mechanics that are built into the game as you go through it. Saying all of that, I would say that as the Japanese player, you do have lots of advantages. But as I found out in my little game, trying to play it from both perspectives, it doesn't always go to plan. So, as the Allied or Dutch Australian force, your key points are that you can't spread yourself across all the areas that you need to. So you have the use of some dummy units and detachments, which are weak at kind of scouting reconnaissance parties, and you need to think carefully about how you deploy those alongside your main forces, which probably most of the time are going to be trying to defend your key objective areas. But terrain is your friend as the Allied player, so use the terrain, use the mountainous terrain, use the rivers to gain advantages as the Japanese come into attack. And that's the same also with bombardments. So you do have, particularly around Laha airfield, some of the forces around there. You've got some artillery there, which, as I found in my game, became used to quite good effect, and ultimately enabled me to defeat the Japanese attacking force in that area. Likewise, I think if you can hold on for the first few turns, or even score some good damage in those early turns, what you do know is the Japanese can't recover very, very quickly. So if you can knock a few units out in those first couple of turns when they're landing, then that might hold out good for you further down into the game in later turns. So there's lots going on there. Again, as the Allied player, where do you put your minefields in the shipping channels to try and kind of upset the invading forces, and again, you can get mixed results with that. Do you try and, as I say, defend everything, or do you sacrifice some for the benefit of the others? So that's general kind of viewpoints from both sides. Before I talk about my own experience of the game that I played, just want to pick out really some key things that I like and maybe didn't like so much, if that's the right word. First of all, pluses. The map is beautiful. The rules are really clearly written. After a couple of reads, I was kind of quite happy with how it all worked. It does follow your kind of normal counter hex type war game, but as I say, you've got some really nice dynamics in there with the landings, the invading forces. You've got the minefields, you've got the terrain, you've got artillery, bombardment. So there's lots of different things going on there, and importantly, as the allo player, the mechanic around do you surrender or hold out a bit longer, and that's quite an interesting one in terms of knowing, is it best to just wave the white flag and get a victory of sorts, or do you hold out even longer, potentially lose badly? That's an unusual thing that I haven't seen in many games, but it does give the ally player a decision to make at the end of turn 8, I believe it is, on there. So yeah, presentation overall excellent, rules clearly written, map was lovely, the detail was great, and the mechanics were really good. If I was going to pick anything out in terms of things that I wasn't so happy with, the counters, I think I commented in my unbagging, are quite small. This is a small game, so I accept that. You know, they're not going to be big 1 inch wide counters or thick counters. And again, it's a low density, small game, small map. So I suppose there's no choice on that one. It just made it a little bit fiddly at times with moving stacks or bunches of counters around. Saying that, again, some of the rules penalise large stacks, so generally speaking, you're not going to have big stacks of counters on the go here, maybe 2 or 3 at most. And the detail on the counters in terms of being able to read what they say even at distance, very, very clear, very concise. So it's a small niggle, but not really one that could be addressed any differently. And overall, I think, you know, the publishers have done a really, really good job of this game. I really like this series. It's their Small Battles series, as you'll be aware from my other video. I've got Santander 37 to break out and have a play of at some point as well, and I think there's some more games on the horizon, so I'll definitely be looking at a few more of these. They're overall very interesting, very good. I've been very impressed. So my own experience of playing the game was I scored an Allied victory, very much against what I was expecting. There was a quite large battle over at Lahar airfield. We had a Japanese invading force coming in on the far side of that island, crossing over the terrain, coming into the airfield. But I had a reasonable force there. I knew it was a major objective for the Japanese, and I did have some artillery, which, using the terrain, I was able to effectively reduce a couple of the Japanese units, and in turn we actually were able to force them to retreat, and we actually had a scenario where the Japanese retreated to try and then block the coastal road, because they were conscious that the Allies might try and move around the coast to reinforce some of the Dutch forces that were hanging on to one of the key objectives further round. So that was an interesting dynamic. In the southwest, we had the Imperial Japanese Naval Force, the Kuro Force, landing just southwest of Ambon itself. That is a very, very powerful force within the Japanese overall arms that they have, and they just started to chew up everything put in front of them as they climbed up the coast towards Ambon. Luckily, I was able to, with the Allied forces, sort of do a folding defence really, and sort of fall back into Ambon with enough forces that I could hold out to turn 8 when I surrendered. What I would say, and this is probably another key point with this game as the Allied player particularly, is knowing when to fight battles, or when to stand your ground or when to fall back. And because of the way the chart works in terms of combat, you will get retreat with a small r or retreat with a big R results. The big R results mean you have to go back, but the small r, you have a choice to either take a further disorganisation or wound on your counters, or to retreat. And several times I chose to stand and take the damage, particularly when I was in key objective areas, and that bought me enough time to hold out to turn 8, as I've talked about. But I like that mechanic. It's a really clever one in there. On the other side, we had another invading Japanese army landing force. Came in southeast of the Ambon mainland, came up across the mountains, was starting to sort of break out, but they got slowed down by the terrain and by some small Dutch forces sort of doing hit and run tactics. And again, that bought the defenders enough time to kind of get to that turn 8 surrender option. If I'd have played the game on to turn 10, I think it would have been even closer. I'm not sure how much longer the Allies could have held out. So hopefully you've seen a few things on the screen in terms of some of the pictures I've taken during the game. But overall, yeah, I really like Ambon, Burning Sun and Little Seagulls. I think Snafu, the design company, done a really good job. Say it's a small footprint game, but it's one I will play quite a few times more, I would think, in the future, and I'm looking forward to playing it with a human opponent as well. It's not badged as a solitaire game, and of course it's one of these that if you're going to play solitaire, you've very much got to kind of try and clear your mind of what you've just done and put yourself in the mindset of that particular force that you're working with at that time. But I think once you start moving a few things around, you do see there's some very clever strategies that you can play in the game, and overall it gets a big thumbs up for me. So hopefully that's giving you a little bit more of an insight into the game, how it plays, some of the key dynamics and mechanics in there. That's all within what is 9 pages of rules. But yeah, go out and give it a go, and certainly have a look at some of these other games that Snafu are bringing to the table. They look really interesting and a good price point as well. So I hope you've enjoyed the video, and see you again next time.